1982, farm auctions spreading across the Midwest like a plague. You'd see them every weekend. Tractors, combines, entire operations sold off to pay the banks. International Harvester, Allis-Chalmers, White Farm Equipment, American giants that built tractors for generations. By 1986, two of them would be completely dead. The third would be absorbed into something else entirely. The tractors they built in those final years tell the whole story. These were not experimental failures or engineering disasters. These were last-ditch efforts to survive an economic apocalypse that was swallowing everything. The 50 series from International Harvester, the 8000 series from Allis-Chalmers, White's Field Boss lineup. Solid machines, every one of them. But solid iron couldn't save companies drowning in debt during the worst farm economy in half a century. What killed these brands wasn't bad engineering. It was something far bigger, far more brutal, and completely beyond their control. To understand why these companies died, you have to go back to the 1970s. Farmland values were skyrocketing. Banks were pushing farmers to expand, expand, expand. Buy more land, get bigger equipment, leverage everything. Get big or get out. That was the mantra. The USDA secretary himself said it. Farmers who didn't expand were told they'd be left behind. So they borrowed. Heavily. Land prices kept climbing, so the debt looked manageable. You borrow against land worth $2,000 per acre, and when it hits $3,000 per acre, you're sitting pretty. The collateral keeps growing faster than the debt. Then, 1980 hit like a freight train. President Carter imposed a grain embargo against the Soviet Union after they invaded Afghanistan. Overnight, one of the biggest export markets for American grain vanished. Farmers who had planted for those sales were left holding massive surpluses. Grain prices collapsed. Corn that had been $3.50 per bushel dropped below $2 per bushel. Wheat followed the same trajectory. Suddenly, farmers could not generate the revenue they had counted on. But here's where it got catastrophic. Interest rates went insane. The Federal Reserve, fighting inflation, pushed the prime rate to 21% by December 1981. 21%. Farmers who had borrowed at 8% suddenly faced loan renewals at rates that were impossible to service. You're a farmer with $500,000 in debt at 8%. That's $40,000 a year in interest. Manageable if your crops are profitable. Now that same debt at 20% interest? You're paying $100,000 a year just in interest. Your crop revenue hasn't doubled. You're underwater immediately. Land values started crashing. That $3,000 per acre farmland that justified all the borrowing? By 1985, it was worth $1,200 per acre in many regions. Some areas saw 60% drops. Farmers were suddenly holding debt that exceeded the value of everything they owned. The banks had no choice: foreclose or go under themselves. So the auctions started. 235,000 farms were lost during the 1980s. Not small hobby operations. These were multi-generation family farms that had survived the Depression, survived droughts, survived everything. Gone. Rural communities hollowed out. Main streets died. The social fabric of the Midwest was ripping apart at the seams. And the tractor companies? They were bleeding out right alongside the farmers. Tractor sales collapsed from over 200,000 units a year in the late 1970s to under 100,000 by 1982. Farmers who were losing their land weren't buying new equipment. Farmers who kept their land were too broke to upgrade. the entire market evaporated. International Harvester, Allis-Chalmers, White, they had all expanded during the boom years, built new factories, hired thousands of workers, tooled up for production levels that assumed growth would continue. Now they were sitting on massive overhead, bloated inventories, and sales that had fallen off a cliff. The perfect storm wasn't just hitting farmers, it was about to kill the companies that supplied them. International Harvester was already wounded before the farm crisis even started. The company had been building tractors since 1906, nearly 75 years of history. But in 1979, the United Auto Workers went on strike. 6 months. The strike lasted 6 months. Production stopped completely. Dealers had nothing to sell. Farmers who wanted IH tractors bought Deere or Case instead. When the strike finally ended, IH had lost over $600 million. The company was hemorrhaging cash before a single farmer went bankrupt. Then, right in the middle of this disaster, IH made a desperate play. They launched the 50 series in 1981. The 5088, the Fit. These weren't bad tractors. That's the tragedy of it. These were solid machines. The flagship 5488 pushed 130 PTO horsepower from a turbocharged DT466 engine. 6-cylinder diesel, reliable as gravity. The cab was comfortable. The hydraulics were strong. The 3-point hitch could handle serious implements. Farmers who bought them liked them. The engineering was sound. IH's engineers had done their job, but the timing was catastrophic. IH launched the 50 series right into the teeth of the worst farm economy in 50 years. It was like unveiling a new luxury car line the day after the stock market crashed. Dealers couldn't move inventory. Farmers who might have bought were too busy trying to avoid foreclosure. The ones who weren't facing foreclosure were too scared to take on debt for new equipment. You don't buy a $60,000 tractor when your neighbor just lost his farm. 1982 hit International Harvester like a wrecking ball. The company posted a loss of $1.6 billion. At the time, it was the largest corporate loss in American history. The company was dying in real time. IH tried everything. Sold off divisions, laid off thousands of workers, closed plants, cut costs to the bone. Nothing worked. The agricultural equipment market had simply vanished, and IH was too dependent on it to survive. By 1984, it was over. Tenneco, which owned Case, bought International Harvester's agricultural equipment division. The deal was finalized in November. The IH red paint was gone. The Farmall name was gone. 78 years of tractor history ended with a bankruptcy sale. The 50 series tractors became Case IH Magnums. Same machines, different paint scheme. Case IH Red replaced IH Red. The tractors themselves kept working. They were good iron. But the company that built them was dead. Walk into a Case IH dealership today, and you're standing in what used to be International Harvester. The Magnum line traces directly back to those 50 series tractors. The engineering lived on. The brand didn't. The cruel irony is that the 5488, the 5288, all of them, they were exactly what IH needed from an engineering standpoint. Reliable, powerful, well-built. Farmers who bought them got decades of service. You can still find running 50 series tractors on farms today, 40 years later. But good engineering couldn't save a company drowning in debt during an economic collapse. The 50 series arrived at exactly the wrong moment in history. IH's final tractors were solid machines that never had a chance. Allis-Chalmers had been building tractors since 1914. 70 years of history, That Persian orange paint was legendary. You could spot an Allis from half a mile away across a field. But by the late 1970s, the company was already struggling. Farm equipment sales were getting tougher. Competition was brutal. Allis-Chalmers started diversifying away from agriculture, buying up construction equipment companies, industrial machinery operations, anything to reduce dependence on the farm market. Then, right as the farm crisis was building, Allis-Chalmers made one last push. Between 1980 and 1982, they launched the 8000 series, the 8010, the 8030, the 8050, and the flagship, the 8070. The 8070 was Allis-Chalmers' most powerful row crop tractor ever built. 175 horsepower. That was serious power for the early 1980s. The machine could pull heavy tillage equipment, run large planters, handle anything a big acre farmer needed. Some models used Deutz air-cooled engines. That was controversial. American farmers were used to liquid-cooled diesels. Air-cooled engines were different, simpler in some ways, but they sounded different, ran different. Some farmers loved them, others didn't trust them. The tractors themselves were well engineered. The 8070 had a comfortable cab, good visibility, strong hydraulics. Farmers who ran them generally liked them. The machines did the work they were supposed to do. But Allis-Chalmers faced the same problem as International Harvester: timing. The 8000 series launched right into the collapse. Sales evaporated. Farmers weren't buying. The ones who were buying went with safer bets like Deere. When your neighbor's losing his farm, you don't take chances on a brand that might not be around for parts and service. The dealer network started crumbling. Small-town Allis-Chalmers dealers were closing as fast as the farms around them. You cannot sell tractors without dealers. You cannot service tractors without parts support. The whole distribution system was falling apart. By 1983, Allis-Chalmers was in full retreat. The company started selling off divisions, trying to raise cash, trying to survive. The construction equipment went. The industrial machinery went. Piece by piece, the company was being dismantled. 1985 was the end. Deutz Fahr, the German equipment manufacturer, bought what was left of the agricultural equipment division. The new company was called Deutz Allis. The Persian orange paint stayed for a while, but the Allis-Chalmers name was dying. The 8000 series tractors became orphans. Great machines with nowhere to go. Dealers were gone. Parts support was uncertain. Farmers who had bought them were stuck hoping the new owners would honor warranties and keep parts available. By 1990, even the Deutz Allis name was gone. AGCO bought the remnants and absorbed them into their growing collection of acquired brands. Allis-Chalmers, as a tractor manufacturer, had completely vanished. 76 years of tractor history ended, not with an engineering failure, but with an economic collapse the company couldn't survive. The 8070, the 8050, all of them, they were solid tractors. You can still find running 8000 series machines today. They did their job, but doing their job was not enough to save the company that built them. Allis-Chalmers' final tractors were good iron that arrived in a market that had stopped buying. White Farm Equipment was different from International Harvester and Allis-Chalmers. White didn't have decades of organic tractor building history. The company was created through mergers. Oliver, Minneapolis Moline, Cockshut, all rolled together in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The strategy was simple: become a full-line manufacturer through acquisition. Buy up struggling brands, consolidate production, compete with Deere and IH on every front. On paper, it made sense. In practice, it loaded White with massive debt. But White pushed forward. They had product lines from all the acquired brands. The Field Boss series, articulated four-wheel drive tractors built in the former Minneapolis Moline factory. The American series, conventional row crop tractors that carried forward Oliver and White designs. The Field Boss lineup was White's answer to the big four-wheel drive market. Models included 2105, 2135, and 2155. These were articulated tractors, the front and rear sections connected by a pivot joint. All four wheels were powered, built for big acreage and heavy tillage, the kind of work that required serious traction. The 2155 Field Boss pushed over 150 horsepower with a Cummins diesel engine, a power shift transmission, and an enclosed cab. For farmers running thousands of acres, these machines could handle the workload. The articulated design gave them maneuverability that straight-frame four-wheel drives couldn't match. The American series covered the conventional row crop market. Models included 270, 285, and 2105. These were traditional two-wheel drive tractors for smaller operations, general farm work, anything that didn't require the massive power of the Field Boss line. These weren't bad tractors. White's engineering teams knew what they were doing. Farmers who bought Field Boss tractors generally got reliable machines. The American series did the work it was designed for. The iron was sound. But White had a fatal problem that went deeper than product quality. The company was carrying enormous debt from all those acquisitions. Buying Oliver, buying Minneapolis Moline, buying Cockshut, every merger had been financed with borrowed money. White had been betting that sales growth would cover the debt payments. When the farm crisis hit, that bet collapsed instantly. 1980 to 1981 was catastrophic for White. Sales didn't just decline, they evaporated. Dealers couldn't move inventory. Farmers who might have considered White tractors were buying Deere instead, or they weren't buying at all. The revenue White needed to service its debt simply vanished. The debt payments didn't vanish. They kept coming, month after month, and White couldn't make them. By late 1980, the company was in serious trouble. By 1981, it was over. White Farm Equipment filed for bankruptcy protection in 1981. The company tried to reorganize, tried to keep operating, but the damage was done. Farmers don't buy tractors from bankrupt companies. Dealers don't want to represent brands that might disappear. The bankruptcy filing was effectively a death sentence. White limped along for a few more years under bankruptcy protection, but it was a slow death. In 1985, Allied Products bought what was left. The company was renamed White New Idea, combining White's tractor operations with New Idea's hay and forage equipment. It didn't matter. The White name was already dead in the minds of farmers. By the end of the decade, even the White New Idea brand was gone. AGCO eventually absorbed the remnants, adding them to their collection of orphaned farm equipment brands. The irony is brutal. White Farm Equipment was created through mergers, built on the idea that consolidation would create strength. Then the company died and got merged itself, absorbed into something else, the brand name erased from history. The Field Boss tractors, the American series, they kept working on the farms where they'd been bought. Good machines that outlasted the company that built them. But White's gamble on growth through acquisition had failed completely when the market collapsed. By 1986, the landscape of American farm equipment manufacturing had completely changed. Three major brands that had built tractors for generations were effectively dead. International Harvester, Allis-Chalmers, White Farm Equipment, all gone within 6 years. Case IH rose from the ashes. Tenneco, which owned Case, absorbed International Harvester's agricultural division and created a new brand. The IH Red became Case IH Red. The Magnum line continued, carrying forward the engineering from those final 50 series tractors. The machines survived even though the company did not. A GCO became the graveyard of American tractor brands. The company eventually absorbed the remnants of White and Allis-Chalmers, along with Massey Ferguson and a dozen other orphaned names. Walk through an AGCO parts catalog today, and you are looking at the collected remains of brands that could not survive the 1980s. Deere emerged as the dominant survivor. They had played it conservative during the boom years, did not overextend, kept debt manageable. When the crisis hit, Deere had the financial strength to weather it. They lost money, but they did not lose the company. By the end of the decade, Deere's market dominance was unshakable. The consolidation was brutal and complete. Dozens of tractor brands that had existed in the 1970s were reduced to essentially 3 players: Deere, Case 1H, and AGCO. The diversity was gone. The competition was gone. An entire generation of American manufacturing had been wiped out. The human cost was staggering. 235,000 farms lost. That is not just numbers. That is families, communities, entire ways of life erased. Small towns across the Midwest hollowed out. Main streets died. Schools closed. Churches closed. The social fabric that had held rural America together for generations was torn apart. The machines themselves tell a different story. The 50 series tractors, the 8000 series, the Field Boss lineup. These were all solid tractors, well engineered, built to last. Farmers who bought them got decades of service. You can still find these machines working today, 40 years later. They failed not because of engineering problems, not because of quality issues, not because farmers didn't want them. They failed because of economic forces completely beyond anyone's control. Interest rates, grain embargoes, collapsing land values. These weren't things tractor companies could engineer their way out of. The 1980s farm crisis didn't just reshape American agriculture. It killed an entire generation of manufacturers. Companies that had survived the Great Depression, survived 2 world wars, survived every economic challenge for decades. They couldn't survive this. Today, those final tractors are collectibles. Enthusiasts restore them, show them, preserve them as reminders of brands that couldn't outlast the crisis. Every 54888 wearing IH Red, every 8070 in Persian orange, every Field Boss painted white. They're survivors of the decade that killed their makers. The engineering was sound. The iron was good. The economics were impossible. That's the story of American farm equipment in the 1980s. Those final tractors, built by dying companies in desperate times, still work today. You will find them on farms, at shows, in collections across the country. Every 54888, every 8070, every Field Boss is a survivor of the decade that killed their makers. The engineering was sound. The economics were impossible. If you run one of these machines, let me know in the comments. Which brand's last stand do you respect most?